Okay, let's. Something happened recently. I've got it here on my trusty iPhone. Tyler Skaggs. Do you follow baseball very much? Is that one of your areas?
Somewhat.
Who's Tyler Skaggs?
He was the pitcher, right, that overdosed?
Now, you use the term overdose. I never use it. You know where I'm coming from.
Well,
He
this,
had
yeah.
ethanol, fentanyl, and oxycodone in his system.
Yeah.
By the way, I should say most crazy drug users use way too many different impure drugs and don't die. On the other hand, you certainly upload your chances of dying.
Right.
So I don't know. Before we talk about anything else about, they convicted a guy of murder. He was some kind of front office guy. You know, he wasn't a ball player. He was a communication guy who gave him some of the drugs. How do you react to that they convicted the guy of murder for Tyler Skaggs dying?
I don't react well to it. It doesn't jive with me. Yeah, I mean, the idea that he had so many different things in his system that show certain choices that he made about what he needed to supplement his life in all different ways, and the various substances when they mixed probably killed him. And so unless one person sold him every one of those things and understood that, and he gave it to him with intent to die, then it's not even in the right ballpark, so to speak.
Now, if you were, this is totally hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
You don't coach people on taking drugs. That's not your line of work. If you knew Tyler Skaggs and you were his mental health advisor or a friend, what would you say to him?
All right. Well, Carl Hart says it he says this a lot. There are things you could say about why do you want these substances? What are they doing for you? And look, mixing them together at once, that's not a good cocktail, but you might be able to get the sensation you're looking for in different ways, or taking less of a dose, or testing drugs for purity, or whatever. There's so many things
you would
could
give
do.
a harm reduction menu.
Yeah.
And one thing you would say is, well, don't take an opioid and drink alcohol at the same time. Let's just start at the top of bad things to do.
Right.
So now you're not going to, I don't want to get you in trouble, Zach. If you were in the baseball commissioner's office and you went around to all the clubs at the beginning of the year, you might, I'm not saying you would do this, you might give a similar message. You might say, I know some of you are going to take drugs. The reason I say that is because quite a few people in America take drugs.
Mm.
And they took testimony from 4 guys at the trial, none of whom were convicted. One of them was a Mets pitcher named Matt Harvey, and he took the same drugs. So you're sitting there thinking, well, he's not a criminal. Matt Harvey, people like him. And so your correct deduction would be people take drugs, and baseball players probably take a fair amount of painkillers because they make millions and millions, $25 million a year, often to pitch through pain.
We were talking in a previous recording, for us it's 5 minutes ago, but for people viewing it's however long ago, about keeping up an image. And it's the same thing, in schools, where you can't give the message, well, if you're going to do drugs here, do it this way. Of course you can. That's the life-saving message you could give people. But no one does, because no one wants to be the person who is misquoted or misrepresented as saying, go ahead and take drugs. And then somehow influencing, this is mythology, but then somehow influencing people who would not otherwise have taken them to take them. A baseball commissioner doesn't want to go to a club and say, admit to even thinking that it's possible that any of those ball players are taking drugs, which would be a league violation. But I could imagine doing it. I don't think I would be afraid to do it. I really don't. I think if I had to give a talk in a dugout to various teams and travel, I think I'd be okay saying we're adults. I don't know what you do on your weekends. You probably do stuff I wouldn't do, and or maybe not. Whatever. Look, a lot of ball players in the past few years and probably forever have been taking drugs. And just keep your head up when you're on the road. You want to make sure that you're safe. We want you playing ball. We want you alive and healthy, and that's really the bottom line. Overall, we care about your safety. So whatever you do, whatever you get into, try to keep your head down and play. But if you need something, if you're going to take a drug, then just be cautious. Here's a list of things you could do to mitigate,
Make sure it's the drug it's supposed to be.
Right.
Get it from a good source. Don't mix it with other drugs and drink. And probably keep in touch with one of your teammates and say, look, can you check in every couple hours? You know what I mean? I just want to make, somebody has to, have your wife or somebody who cares about you double check with you while you're doing this. Normal health safety mechanisms. And then Tyler Skaggs might still be alive and they wouldn't have to try this guy for murder. And then Matt Harvey wouldn't have to go up and say, well, I gave him drugs too, but, not these drugs. So to prove what we just said, let's go back in history. So now people are caring about painkillers and oxycodone and fentanyl. The last crisis before that was the steroids scandal. By the way, they call them PEDs,
Drugs.
performance enhancement drugs.
Performance enhancement, yeah.
But in a way,
that's what drugs are.
Painkillers are performance enhancement drugs.
Right. All drugs are that.
I mean, they're sort of saying, well, I'm not going to be able to pitch when my elbow hurts. So.
And steroids are not performance enhancing if you're taking so much of them, if your lifestyle is dedicated to them to an unhealthy extent. They're probably detract from performance, just the same way that, that seems maybe counterintuitive to a mainstream narrative, just the same way that something like a painkiller or cocaine or whatever the drug is actually enhancing if used in a way that it enhances skills. So we're moving away from drugs.
The only good, some awful great players took steroids.
Right.
And they haven't let any of them into the Hall of Fame. And it's a problem. There used to be two guys, I think they called them the Bash brothers in Oakland. They were Mark McGuire and Jose Canseco. Jose Canseco was like Superman. He would hit 30 home runs and steal 30 bases. I'm going to say something that sounds crazy. Mark McGuire is good. Jose Canseco is bad. People didn't like Jose Canseco. I don't know what kind of a pain in the ass he was. People like Mark McGuire.
Yeah.
They both hit a lot of home runs. Jose Canseco for a time was the best player in baseball. Then he faded. Who knows what he was doing. Possibly the greatest hitter of all times isn't in the Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds has 762 home runs.
Mm-hmm. And 70 in a single season.
He's bad. Now, Roger Clemens was sort of good, and he testified. There was a congressional investigation in 2006, and he put down steroids, but it turned out he was taking them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then Sammy Sosa, people kind of liked, so he's good. And then the strangest case of all, Alex Rodriguez is like fourth in the all-time home run list. He got caught twice with steroids.
Mm-hmm.
He's number 4 with 696 homers. The second time that he got caught with steroids, they banned them for the entire season of 2014. Or he wouldn't be the guy with the most homers. He'd have over 700.
Of the players you listed, although Barry Bonds is up there, A-Rod must be the best all-around baseball player.
And the amazing thing about Alex Rodriguez is in terms of my crazy dichotomy, he went from being bad to being good.
Mhm.
They
Right.
have him on TNT, and they have him with Big Pappy, the guy from the Red Sox, and they have him with um, Big Poison, this guy, Frank Thomas.
Mhm.
You know, TNT does a good, they're funny. And Alex Rodriguez is, I mean, I didn't know how smart he was.
Mhm.
I mean, the other guys they're not dumb, but they're characters. Alex Rodriguez always does this detailed analysis. And I say, what is he, a sports writer in his spare time?
Really, he
One of
knows
the
the
greatest
game.
baseball players of all time. He's got a great, and now people like him again because he's on TNT, and they say, what a good guy. He's smart, nice guy.
Can you imagine if Cal Ripken did steroids? I'm a Baltimore fan. Cal Ripken did steroids. He'd be great in, and he'd be in the good category also.
So my point at the steroid scandal is, well, how people react to, well, they're not letting anybody in the hall. They're going to have to they can't keep Barry Bonds out of the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So now we have to go back to the earlier, great drug baseball scandals in our time. Painkillers now, steroids in the early 2000s, and still. And then you mentioned cocaine. There were the Pittsburgh drug trials in 1985, and that was a cocaine scandal.
Mm-hmm.
And they highlighted Dale Burrow, who's Yogi Berra's son, Lee Mazzilli, Dave Parker, superstar, and Willie Aikens, Vida Blue, Enos Cabell, Keith Hernandez, Tim Raines, Lonnie Smith. They were called before a Pittsburgh grand jury, and they were national drug trials. Once again, cocaine, obviously their whole point was of everybody is how bad cocaine is. Lonnie Smith batted .333 and won the batting title during his big cocaine year. I think it might have been 1984. And Keith Hernandez was the most popular testifier because he got up and he said, it's poison, it'll kill you. Keith Hernandez is a borderline Hall of Fame player. Batted around 300, won championships with St. Louis and Mets. It was really great that he went to the Betty Ford Center and quit cocaine, wasn't it, Zach?
Explain this part again in case people are not keeping up. We were talking about steroids before. First of all, we were sort of commenting on there's a blurred distinction about what's performance enhancing or not. We were talking about steroids as being performance enhancing. People were not getting in trouble for doing cocaine because everyone thought that cocaine was performance enhancing. People were getting in trouble for doing cocaine. Well, at least the mainstream narrative at the time was that baseball players were getting involved in this illegal, horrible, evil drug ring that kills people. And you're saying, look at the names of some of these ball players during their formative cocaine years. We're putting up pretty damn good numbers.
Somebody just died. Do you happen to know the actor who just died? Who was in Goodfellas? Do you know his name? I forgot.
Goodfellas. And it's not like, oh man, I hope it's not like Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro. It's not one of those guys, is it?
None of those. The third guy, who played Henry Hill. What's his name?
Ray Liotta was the guy.
Ray Liotta died.
I can't believe it. He was pretty young.
And who's the famous director? It's his most famous film.
Oh, not Scorsese.
Scorsese, yeah. Just reviewing. So I was reading some old material. There's a famous scene where Ray Liotta takes Braca, his girlfriend, to the famous club, and they walk through an aisle, and they say, he gives tips. He says hello to the band, the cooks, and people commented that Scorsese was recreating one of his Scorsese had a cocaine period.
Mm-hmm.
And people were saying, well, he was doing that as a cocaine trip. And then So you're sitting there thinking, Jesus, he's sort of the greatest director around, and he had a cocaine period. What's that about?
Yeah.
And Lonnie Smith led the league in hits, and cocaine's bad for you. And Keith Hernandez, he went from a little bit bad. Keith Hernandez is a Mets announcer now, with Ron Darling, a pitcher, and some local guy who does play-by-play. They're beloved. Everybody loves Keith Hernandez. He does a video blog about his cat. And so, Keith Hernandez wasn't as disliked as Alex Rodriguez, but he's a popular guy. That was a bad joke I made about when he went to the Betty Ford Center. Although he says cocaine can kill you, he just quit.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he quit? Well, maybe he decided it wasn't working for him anymore, and he quit like a normal human being. And when I named the list of people who took cocaine, 90% of them quit taking cocaine. So where are we in this bottom line here? Gosh, every few years or decades, a new drug scandal appears in baseball. And they seem to be very different drugs. I mean, fentanyl, steroids, cocaine, that's about as different as you can get. But they often all have something to do with performance.
Mm-hmm.
We hear about worst case scenario. We hear about a guy who died. But quite a large group of people are taking these drugs without dying and without often any noticeable negative effect. I mean, one crazy way to go would be, and you already did your great routine. I don't know, you'll have to play it again. You could see the baseball commissioner hiring you to go out and say, I'm not telling anybody to take drugs, but maybe over the years you've noticed people take drugs. I'm not recommending that to you. I'm the safety officer. And there are safer ways to do that and things to be aware of. And I want to review those with you. We don't want anybody harming themselves. You might give some, obviously, if you never took drugs, you wouldn't have that danger, but we know that quite a few people have done and will do that. So let's review that. You could imagine, maybe we'll use this, the last thing we did was describing you as the savior of American communities. I don't know. I know you're not looking for a job. You're happily employed. You like living in Burlington, South Burlington, Vermont. We could propose you as the safety officer for Major League Baseball, and you've already done your dress rehearsal.
Right.
You would come in and what you would say, and you feel you could do it without pissing anybody off, without saying anything illegal, but giving people some good sound advice.
Here's an open message to a safety officer, whatever you want to call that position. You're an attorney. Tell me if I would pass mustard. If you wanted to get by the litigation piece of it, I think it'd be okay. And this, goes for parents or anyone too. It'd be okay to say to a group that you're aware. I like what you said, by the way, Stanton. I'm not saying anyone should use drugs, but you're probably aware people have in these past few years, maybe even this year. If you know someone who's in that predicament, one thing you could tell them, or a few things you could tell them are this, and then you give that same message that just get. So you don't directly give the harm reduction message, you endorse it and say, this is what you could tell your fellow community member, fellow teammate, someone you love, someone you know, because we want everybody to be safe out here. So then you're not the one who, nothing's coming back to you. You didn't tell
You're
anyone.
doing two things at once then. I know within your clinical work, you like to enhance the family. Mm-hmm. I was just thinking myself, I was talking to a guy who I'd known for quite a long time. I met his new girlfriend, and she kept asking me for advice about her son who had an alcohol problem. And I kept passing the questions along to her husband, my friend, because he had a son. And I knew he was a smart guy. And he said, well, I think she can be a little too involved in her son's life. It's not a matter of telling your son to do A, B, or C. It's a matter, and and then she got super pissed off at me for not telling her directly what she should do. And I said, I'm only going to be here tonight. You're married to this guy, and he's, got a son who's okay. And he's pretty smart. He's a resource. So not only were you giving good harm reduction advice, you were enhancing community by saying, you might look out for any fellow players, friends, or relatives who are engaged in this. Here's how to be life enhancing. So 2 birds with 1 stone. Harm reduction, enhancing community and family connections. I don't know. We're going to give you an MVP award, Zach.
And we could sell it.
Au revoir.
Thanks again, Stanton. See you next time.
See you next time.